Hello everyone, and welcome to the Unseen Beings podcast, where we explore what it means to be human in a more than human world. My name is Eric Champa Anderson, and I'm your host and the author of Unseen Beings, How We Forgot the World is More Than Human. In today's episode, we're joined by Tatyanna Wright, a former television producer turned spiritual transformation coach and meditation teacher. She's the host of the wonderful Conscious Diva podcast, where we had a lovely chat. 2 chats actually a few months ago, so be sure to check it out. After decades of study in the Vedic tradition of Kashmir Shaivism, Tatyanna now works in the Khaas Nepali Shamanic tradition and is a student of Bhola Nath Banstola, a Jhankri Shaman from Nepal. Tatyanna is also currently writing her first book, which I'm very much looking forward to. And in this episode, we talk about a lot of super fascinating topics, including her introduction to the Khaas Nepali tradition, her relationship with Nāgas and nature spirits, and the magic that arises when we enter into dynamic relationship with unseen beings. Thank you so much for being here, Tatyanna. Welcome to the Unseen Beings podcast.
Thank you so much, Eric. This is awesome. Those are topics I love to talk about, so I'm happy to be here to share. Thank you.
So let's just get started why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got into this work?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think people that are drawn to the spirit world have always had an inkling. You just don't maybe know it because of how the culture in which you're growing up, what you're exposed to. And for me, I was really fortunate to be living in Asia as a small child. I lived in Bangkok in Thailand, and I lived in Malaysia in Kuala Lumpur, and until the age of, I was almost 8. And so at that age, I was really, to be immersed in cultures that recognize that spirit is ever present. It embodies everything. And if anyone who's ever been to Southeast Asia or anywhere in Asia or India, for that matter, you see there's shrines everywhere, there's temples everywhere. They'll be in the tuk-tuks, they'll be in a taxi, they'll be in the foyer of a lobby, they'll be in every shop, they're in people's backyards, they're everywhere, right? They're random, they're on the side of the road, they're can be just in the forest, they're in the garden of a storefront, they're literally everywhere. And I loved that. And in addition, there were, when we were specifically talking about living in Bangkok, there were the monks walking around from the Buddhist tradition, and to see them with their rice bowls and to be able to go into all these beautiful temples, it was really an amazing experience for me. And so from a very young age, I was exposed to these practices and traditions, and had an amazing ama, a Thai nanny, and she would take me to her village, and I was exposed to, through her, just all these amazing, practices. And it was wild, I'm so grateful for all of that. And then fast forward and moved to Australia. I grew up there, which was a total, just very white, very different, very, Catholic, there's no temples anywhere. I went to an all-girls school, private girls' school, and I felt very out of place because I really felt whoa, what? Where am I? What's I totally felt like a fish out of water. And but because I had this relationship, unbeknownst to me, with spirit, because I was introduced to spirits and always felt them around me and could feel them and see them as a child, I continued that relationship in Australia as a young child. I still continue. I didn't talk to anyone about it. Obviously, we didn't have the internet. This was in the 80s, early 80s, and but I was so, I don't know, I just knew there was more than what we can see, and I felt it and I saw it. And even though I didn't have anyone to necessarily speak to about it, my parents certainly weren't that way inclined. And they just said, oh, you have an overactive imagination. And my dad would say, oh, she marches to the beat of a different drummer. Oh, she's away with the fairies or whatever. But yeah, so that was my early introduction to all of this. And I, as a teenager at 18, it was my first time I was introduced to yoga, and I went to yoga class with a girlfriend, and immediately, just in that asana class, I could feel the energy moving through my body. And I thought, this is way better than the gym. going to the gym with some girlfriends, as I guess most teenagers do. Like you get from 16, you sort of start getting people get into the gym, and I guess their bodies a bit more and whatever. And I hated the gym. I just thought it like, and again, because it was like the 80s, like aerobics were a big thing, like all this kind of, it was like, it was hilarious. And I was always freaked out by the gym equipment. And so when you did yoga, I was like, oh, this is it. Like, this is it. I felt it in my body. That very first downward dog, I really felt the energy move through me. And I was just like, okay, what is this practice? What is this? And really that began my journey with yoga, which opened me up to Tantra, to the Tantric traditions of Kashmir Shaivism, but also ultimately the practice that I do today, the Khaas Nepali tradition. So.
Well, tell us a bit about the practice that you do today, and maybe how you met your teacher as well, because it's quite fascinating. I've been really interested in Nepali shamanic traditions for a long time. A friend of mine, old dear friend of mine, gave me the book Shamanism and Tantra in the Himalayas. And it's one of those books that I still have in the States somewhere that I constantly miss because it was just absolutely, a lot of beautiful images and really excellent, sort of scholastic knowledge in it, but very detailed. And I remember just being absolutely enchanted by it. But it's one of those things where, Tibetan Buddhism, which is what my background's in, is sort of ubiquitous. You find it everywhere. There's all kinds of materials on it and a lot of people that practice it. You don't find a lot of Nepali shamanism outside of Nepal. So I'm really interested how you found the tradition that you entered into, how you met your teacher, and how that sort of evolution went for you.
Okay, do you want the long version?
Yeah, long version.
Well, because it was a totally guided process. Like, that saying that sounds like such a cliche, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Yeah. And it totally was that for me in this instance. I had never heard of the Khaas Nepali tradition or Nepalese shamanism. I've lived in the US for over 25 years, and mostly here in the US, when we hear of shamanism, we think of the Amazon, or we think of maybe Siberian shamans, and we definitely think of ayahuasca, plant medicine associated with shamanic activities, right? And so that was really all I knew, to be honest with you. And I had been practicing Kashmir Shaivism for quite a long time, and I had this feeling. This was probably 8 or so years ago, and I was really feeling this pull. And I had a very dear friend, Sally Kempton, who passed away last year. And Sally was a big teacher and proponent of Kashmir Shaivism, of that tradition. And she's well known for teaching about the goddesses and, in the Tantric tradition. And so I was talking to Sally about it, and just I can really feel this pull, like something is pulling me, and it's beyond, I can't explain it. There's something that's really pulling me, and as I know I need to go deeper, but I also know it's not the yogas. I know it's not in Tantra. I feel like there's something, I don't want to say Tantra wasn't doing it for me, because it was. But do you know what I mean? Like in those traditions of, I love the rituals and the fire ceremonies and the relationship that we learn to enter into with the various deities for support and working with that, whether it's wrathful deities or the more gentle deities, or the goddess energy, or which also can be wrathful. But so I love all of that, and I was definitely benefiting and continue to still work with them today. But there was, I could feel I needed to teach, and I could feel that I needed to work with people, but I didn't know how. In what capacity was I supposed to be working with people? And so anyway, so it was like one summer, and I was telling my friend, I feel like, I want to go do a shamanic weekend, but I don't want to do, ayahuasca. I was like, I don't need to, kind of done that. I don't need, that's not a part of my life now. And she said, yeah, me too. And so lo and behold, literally that night, I go home and this email comes in through the COSM, which is Alex Gray, the artist, the psychedelic artist in the US. Alex Gray has a home in upstate New York where actually COSM now is based. And so they were having a shamanic weekend. So I was like, without, it was no ayahuasca. And I was like, oh, okay, perfect. So it always works out like that, right? So I told my friend, and we decided to go, and we drove up together. It was like in 2 weekends, and we went that time. And when we arrived, they basically separated us because we knew each other. We were friends. They put us with people we didn't know. So and right away, the practitioner explained that this is so you can really learn to tap in, tune in, and strengthen your spiritual skills with a person you know nothing about, right? So here I was partnered with this woman, and one of two major exercises that we did, or practices that I was introduced to. The first one was to meet my spirit guide, and that was amazing. In a very incredible capacity, where we did a guided journey, and he came immediately. He's a horse that's very sort of golden color, not like a palomino, but has this light golden tinge to his coat, and amazing mane. And I was like, of course, I've show jumped horses growing up. I was like, oh yeah, of course, you're my spirit guide is a horse. I love horses. And then we just had this incredible bonding where I sat on his back, bareback, and my chakras aligned with him. And I just felt the incredible connection and support from that side. And then the second exercise with the partner, we had to tune in very specific ways, but then illustrate and tell your partner what you saw. And so she drew this picture of this goddess, and she said, oh my gosh, I don't know who this is, but she's amazing looking, and she's like a half serpent, half like human, but she's got eagle wings, and she looks amazing. And she drew this picture for me, and I was just like, wow, I don't know this goddess, and because she's not in the tantric tradition. And so she said she has a message. You have to get to know her, and she's been with you your whole life. And I was like, oh my God, wow. So that whole weekend, I was like, who are you? I come back home, I Google online, like serpent goddess, like nothing comes up, and except a couple of illustrations or like, whatever, pick some statues online. And but the consistent thing that was coming up was her name, Nagakanya. And so I thought, okay, well, this is obviously who you are, Nagakanya. And I just wasn't getting anywhere with research on the internet. I went into Manhattan, and went to the Met and went to the Asian wing to just look at, the iconography there, and just to see what's here. Are there any representations of this goddess here? Or this being, or whatever. And there are. I mean, there's Nāgas. They have their portrayed in reliefs and in images with the Buddha, and in tankas and so on. But or other wrapped around furbas and so on. So, but it still wasn't giving me anything. I was still sort of like, oh God, like who are you? And I hadn't learned to journey to her yet. I hadn't learned to do a guided journey to experience her. And so then I was really like, oh my God, I really need to learn. I've got to really I was just kind of heard shamanism. So I looked up, shamanic stuff, and nothing was resonating. And then I stumbled upon Sandra Ingerman, who teaches more sort of traditional, in air quotes, shamanism, as sort of native peoples of more the Americas. And so, but she felt, I knew she wasn't my teacher, but I felt like, okay, this is a person I can learn, take some baby steps with. And I signed up over the Shift Network and just did some basic introduction stuff. But then I was like, no, I need to go deeper. And you can't just reach out to Sandra. There's a random email on her website, but there's a whole thing. It's like, no, if you want to get in touch with her, you need to write a handwritten letter, include your email. And I guess, if you resonate with her, she'll write back to you. She'll email you. And so I did that. I wrote to her, and then I got an email back. And then that started the actual relationship with her. And I was like, oh, yay. And I did a journey. And she always says, journey on it. Like the messages will come, journey on it, which as a beginner practitioner doesn't really help, because you want to know, like, why can't you just help me, guide me, like tell me, like, what is it? But what she did do was a beautiful journey where she guided me through a body of water whatever comes to mind. And, on a boat that we journeyed to an entry point to the Nagaloka and crossed into this realm. And there I actually met her. I had an experience of this meeting, and was taken to meet Naga Rani and Naga Raja, and had this whole incredible experience, and I could ask questions there. And then when I came back up out of and so how you get into there is it's rhythmic drumming that alters your state of consciousness versus taking plant medicine or something else. And then she guide, you have the drumming rhythm, and then you're called back up to come back into your body. And so that was amazing. And then after that, I was like, I knew I was going to India in a few months' time. And I just thought, okay, when I go to India, I will ask a friend of mine a bit more about her and see if he knows. He's a great teacher, a tantric teacher. And so anyway, I went, and I had felt that I had this connection, and that they were all around me, and I was really being guided and looked after, and that I should just trust the guidance. And so then when I was in India, I'm asking my friend, and he's like, oh, she's the goddess of Kundalini. And I'm like, no, she's not. Like, she's not, and that may be who this form appears to you as, but that is not, to say she's the goddess representing Kundalini is not, like, for me, it wasn't true. I was like, I thought, no, that's not it. And then we kind of had a discussion about, whatever. And I'm like, I just want to learn her mantra. He's like, the mantra will come to you. And I'm like, So I'm walking through Rishikesh, and there's this little store that's a Rinpoche family. And so it's been in their family for generations, and he's an apprentice artist, and he's painting. He's not actually a Rinpoche, but he's an apprentice painting the tankas and so on. And there's master painters as well, who are actually in the Buddhist tradition, and so the tantric Buddhist tradition. So I love going in there because they're really beautiful, and you just feel the energy emanating from them. And so I go in, and it's tiny, like a hole in the wall. And lo and behold, there's this beautiful tanka on the wall, painting of the Buddha with two Nagas underneath, holding up the platters with the jewels offering. One is offering jewels, one's, the conch shell. And I say, oh my gosh, you've got like a paint, with Nagas in there. And he says to me, oh, you know about the Nagas? And I say, no, I don't know nothing about the Nagas. I've been trying to find out about the Nagas. Do you? And he says, oh, yes, and he's like, so I sit down, I'm like, tell me what you know. And he tells me how they're the wisdom keepers of the earth, and, that they're healers, they're great healers, and then what the jewels represent, and, how they've been with humanity, with the planet for eons. And they're in every tradition, in every culture, and they represent like the pathways. They can sort of turn into this rainbow light and be the crossover point between our world and their world, and and it was amazing actually to have. And he's just saying it matter of factly, like just telling the story. And afterwards, I thought, okay, I'm looking in the wrong tradition. This is not a Hindu. She's not a Hindu goddess, and she's not in this Hindu tantric lineage, although there might be some iconography. I'm totally looking in the wrong place. And so I then started exploring perhaps her representation in the Buddhist tantric traditions, and in Tibet and Nepal, and like what does she mean there? And I was going back to the US in a couple of days' time, so I was online looking, and I find somebody had uploaded a page from a book, and it says the Nagas, and I'm like, oh my God, that's it, like this page, and then it's got like the Naga mantras. That page isn't uploaded, and I'm like, oh my God, what is this? Like, who's uploaded one page from this book? It's just literally that one page, and the book, and then I'm like, what is the book? I've actually got the book here. It's my teacher's book, the Nepali Shamanic Path. But it was like literally one page, the Nagas. Like, that was it. It's not even a full page of copy, right? And so I'm like, oh my God, what is this book? And I go and Google it on Amazon, and it just come out. I'm like, oh my God, I can buy it. So I buy it right away. By the time I'm home, it's there. And I go straight to the section on the Nāgas. I then read the whole chapter. I look at the mantras. I'm like, oh, wow, like this is
There
it.
it is.
Then I close the book, the cover, and I read the title, and I look down at the foreword, and it says the foreword is by Sandra Ingerman. And I'm like, you knew all along. And so I then email her and I say, in a very quick detail, that whole story I just shared. And she writes back, I'm really glad you found your teacher. And she said, I'm going to introduce you to him. And then she did. She put me on an email to him. And so then that's how I met him, essentially. It was totally guided. And then we communicated over FaceTime because he doesn't live in the US. And he asked me if I had any Naga statues, and I did. And then he asked me how many snakes, serpents are in her hood. Was it 5, 7, or 9? And then he explained what that meant. And he had told me how I should rearrange my altar to best represent her and work with her, and then which days of the weeks, Monday and Thursday. And then he actually imparted the mantra to me, even though it's shared in his book. It's a different, as you know, it's a transmission-based practice. So that's how I met her. That's how I met him. Sorry, that's how I met Naga Kanya, and how she guided me to Bhola. And now it's amazing. She's with me. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I feel a very strong connection to the Nagas, and retrospectively, I can also see how the Nagas were always with me living in Bangkok, because they're in Bangkok.
Yeah,
the river in Bangkok is a story, a mythology story about the serpent that's there that they believe still lives there from time to time. There are these lights, not, I guess, I don't want to say fireworks, but some kind of bright light that comes out that they believe are the Nagas, right? I'm sure you know that
I've
story.
seen videos of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I and the Nagas are on all the temples in throughout Southeast Asia. There they are. They're protectors. They're the guardians.
Yeah. Oh, what a lovely story. It's really, it's incredible. Even with the, the FaceTiming and the emailing and all of that, there's so many, it feels like such a classic story in a lot of ways. It's very traditional in many respects, despite, or, especially integrating many of these sort of, modern features of the world, really showing how it sort of transcends just this kind of, antiquarian idea of how things once were, and it has to be that way in order to be authentic. That's, your story is an excellent example of how it can be fully integrated into the ways that we communicate and the ways that we relate with one another on a global level. These beings aren't limited by any kinds of antiquated constructs, I suppose. It's something that you said earlier on that really struck me, and that I feel I've felt in my own life, and I think a lot of folks feel some similarities in this respect. Is you said it's not that Tantra wasn't doing it, and, understood, and yet I think there's this fascinating dynamic that I've experienced in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, which, for those that aren't aware, it has incorporated many components of pre-Buddhist shamanic traditions of the Himalayas and the Tibetan plateau, but has really sort of renegotiated them and repackaged them in a distinctly Buddhist kind of worldview in a Buddhist context. And especially in the transmission of these systems into, we could say, the West, but really just the modern sort of, global world. There's been this kind of differentiation between the transcendent practices that center around the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, or in, non-Buddhist traditions, just gods and these, sort of elevated divinities. And there's these transcendent practices that are supposed to be more superior and more serious and more sort of, spiritual in an elevated sense, versus these more worldly practices, which in Tibetan Buddhism are often described as being sort of auxiliary or supplementary. And those are often the practices that involve real spirit relations and relations with these non-human beings. Just the comment that you made of your friend noting, she's the goddess of Kundalini, this idea. I find that quite fascinating, because we do have this tendency, don't we, to for something to be important, it has to be a representation of something. They need to be some kind of a symbol of a lofty spiritual principle or some kind of idea, as opposed to just being a being in and of themselves. And it really feels like your journey with Nagakanya and with this practice has really been this sort of sense of recovering that real experience of relationship, going beyond just symbolism and sort of allegory and these, elevated kinds of paths that are so focused on transcendence. This is a much more immanentist kind of approach to spirituality, really getting down into the level of relationship with these beings on their own terms. It's that's an aspect of these traditions that I think is really sorely underappreciated, especially today. We've in the so-called West, we've had transcendent spiritual practices for thousands of years. We're no strangers to systems that are supposed to take us away from the world and into something greater or more eternal. But we've really lost sight of these practices that bring us deeper into the earth, into our own embodiment, and into relationship with other than human beings who in many cases have a great deal of knowledge and wisdom to share with us, from the elevated and profound to the minutia of just what it means to be human in a more than human world.
100%. I mean, so I've been practicing with Nagakanya now for several years, and it's been amazing. I mean, Bhola, straight off the bat, he knew I had he could tell that I had a background in Tantra, we could call it. And when we do practices, what I came to realize very quickly is a lot of the mantras in the Khaas Nepali tradition, and as you pointed out, this sort of this crossover, right, across that whole area, that whole region. And I realized very quickly, wow, this is a lot like, so the deities, for example, and I say a lot like Shiva, as an example, in Tantra and in the Kashmir Shaivism tradition. And this is a tantric tradition from the northern Himalayas, right, for Kashmir, and Shiva being the ultimate being in that tradition, and that Shakti is his counterpart, his consort, and the Shakti, we're awakening, the practice of awakening the Shakti within us and connecting to all that is. So similarly, in the Khaas Nepali tradition, we work with Shiva, but we work with Shiva as Mahankala. So while we do also, sometimes work with Om Namah Shivaya mantra, that's really Shivaratri. It's only one time of the year. That's not a sort of an everyday chanted mantra, so to speak. We're working with it very specifically to honor Shiva in his form, in his I guess original form, the form we most recognize Shiva as. But we mostly work with Mahankala and Mahakali as well, and we always work with the consort and the female counterpart, and on a yantra, so on a grid that represents there's, I'm going to get this wrong, there's not twists and more than, I want to say 24, but there's more. So we're working with a group of 8 pretty much all the time, very specifically, and not just the male and female counterparts, but also their animal vehicle. So they sit on a yantra together, and then each one and so there's activations. I mean, it's similar to what you do in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, but so some of them are really wrathful, but they really get to the core of whatever it is your issues are. That's really brought to the surface very quickly. But then there's also much more expansive work. So then there are other deities, again, similarly to your tradition, that we can work with to ward off evil spirits, extract spirits that are trapped in someone's body, or in a location, in a home, in any environment. So it goes, that's not my calling. That's not the work I do, to work, to go and, purge spirits from there. Yeah. And there are people who totally do that. They specialize in that, and it's very, very specified work with certain tools and in spirited objects that are required to, iron for example, iron box, whatever, things that you really need that person needs to know to be trained in a very skillful way, because you can just muck around with, with these spirits that are, causing havoc for people in their lives or whatever, right? But that's not my calling. But through working with Bhola, I realized I could actually it really opened me up to my own healing gifts, to working one-on-one with people as a transformation coach. And what that basically means is helping a person transform where they're at now. They're ready. People come to me when they're ready to literally change their lives, or they've been living with something for decades and they can feel it and it's causing them incredible anxiety or stress or just whatever's happening. They're feeling it as, pain, physical pain in the body. And so we pinpoint, and I ahead of that session, I work with, we'll do a 30-minute consultation just to really hone in on the intention, and I tune into then what is this person's need, and then when we do the actual session, I do my own 1 hour prep work where I'm tuning into the deity who is being called forth to support that person from the Bairungs, really. So it's I'm saying Mahankala, but it's really the Bairungs, Bairung, Bhairavi. Those are two. Then you have and so on and so forth. But so who in this sort of collective of Bairungs, Bhairava, Bhairavi. There's several different names of saying that. Again, it's another form of Shiva. But who is going to be able to support me and my client for the best and highest good, and always coming from this incredibly high place of love, and then channeling messaging that's coming through for them, and then halfway through the sessions are 90 minutes, they guide all this incredible healing light that comes through, and they get, and I like to describe it as an embodiment of light, because it literally comes through, enters the body, up levels, sort kind of moves in and now this is where the shamanic aspect comes in. During this lights portion, energy is literally churned and moved from depending which chakra is being affected the most. Sometimes it's a few together, and they're really, it's quite an active practice. So that's the difference with, like, say, regular meditation, like just working with the mantra passively, where you're chanting it in your mind quietly and whatever, versus fully, like, you're wholly involved, your body, everything, we're moving, and you're really, like, things are being articulated quite loudly. Maybe there's even, incense being burned or an implement being used, sometimes depending on how stuck this energy is within the body that needs to be released. And so it's quite amazing. And the Nagakanya is always there with me, supporting me, keeping me safe and grounded, and also helping you with her healing. When I work with her, I'm always thanking her and all the Nagas actually for imparting me and guiding me and blessing me with the healing wisdom to help others heal, but also to help heal myself, and to help, so that I can open up and come from a deeper, more profound place of compassion and grace and love, to help, to work with this, whoever the person is, So the Nagas are really profound, and really, when in my experience, as I learned to work with them more deeply and opened myself up to them and asked to be shown the Nagaloka more, or, for example, now I live in Vermont in a forest on 10 acres. This was totally a guided process to living in the forest. And when I told Bhola we're moving from the city to the countryside, he said immediately, that's like, I'm not surprised. This is, the Nagas are guiding you. There's a lot of nature spirits that you need to meet. And so when I was up here, I showed him on FaceTime. I was like, look. And I have a pond and a stream that wraps around, feeds into another. He was like, you have the Nagas are there, and you have all these other nature spirits. He's like, you need to get out into the forest. And, he doesn't use the word commune ever, but he's like, you need to introduce yourself, yourself to the spirits, the nature spirits that you live amongst, because you have many there. And so that's been an incredible practice. And he taught me the practice of with Vana Devi. Vana Devi is the nature, she's the goddess of the forest. And she rides upon a huge, he says, cockerel, which essentially a giant rooster, and she, take out seeds to offer the rooster or the cockerel, and when the weather it's not covered in snow, Like I get into the forest, like deep into the forest. And sometimes I just do put on all my full-on snow gear and get out there and like, you know, take a bag of seed and some other stuff, and I'm offering them to all the birds and, you know, the creatures of the forest. But yeah, it's really enhanced my life in ways I could never have imagined. And that is when I say Tantra wasn't doing it. My life had been enhanced in a way that I felt, okay, this is, I don't want to say as far as this practice is taking me, because that's not true. Like you can always, you know, when you're working, like I'm working with Tara right now. And so I've gone back to working with Tara because I'm writing my book, Tara in her form of Ugaratara, for the, you know, cutting through like the wisdom, what needs to come through, the wisdom, guide me, help support me as I write this book, so I can be this channel is to allow what needs to be on the page, the wisdom to come through so we can help others, right? So that's an example of continuing to work with, you know, one of the goddesses, and she's not necessarily a goddess that we work with in the Khaas Nepali tradition. But what this tradition has really helped me do is align me with what I always knew was to be true, that spirits are real, and that I have the capacity to tune into that and to actually work with other people and to heal. I just needed the right teacher to show me that, to how to do this and awaken that remembrance within myself, you know. So yeah.
So juicy. There's many things I want to dive into at that. Something that strikes me as well that I've always felt with the Himalayan shamanic traditions, in contrast to the more sort of formalized and we could say liturgical sorts of religious traditions like Tibetan Buddhism, is the sense of embodiment. You know, the embodiment and also the localization. I think that these are two really important features of more shamanically oriented traditions. You know, like you were talking about the various implements and the iron box and things like that. We use all of those in Tibetan Buddhism as well. They're, you know, a part of certain kinds of rituals, but for the most part, unless you're doing like a drupchen or some kind of, you know, specific ritual procedure that requires them, they're often sort of ornamental. You know, people will have a purva on their altar. They'll have, you know, maybe one of the little the suppression boxes hidden away somewhere, and they might, you know, take out the implements and demonstrate them. But they're used in this very ritualized manner, and there is a sense of separation from the actual sort of even spiritual utility of these things and an engagement with them in a more intuitive way, which is really, I think, an essential feature of making our spiritual practice really embodied and actually living. And that's something that I've always really appreciated in Nepali and more, you know, broader sort of Himalayan shamanic traditions and shamanic traditions as a whole, is that really profound sense of embodiment. You know, I think even something as little as talking about the mounts that various deities ride on. This is also something that, you know, you'll read it in the texts, and then it's never really noted otherwise. You might see it in a tanka. But I get the sense that the presence of those animals in this tradition is really quite a bit more literal, and perhaps the animals themselves, because they've been a part of also ritual procedures in some, you know, some ways that it might be a little bit, you know, difficult to sort of discuss and relate with in a
killing elephants. I mean, I know that for a fact. They're definitely not killing elephants or swans and, you know, ritualizing the animal in that regard. But on the yantra that represents all the Bairungs and Mahankala and everyone. and they're not pets. They really are their vehicles that they travel upon. And so when I was creating it, Bhola was very specific. He's like, make them out of clay and then put them on, you know, make literally, and as you're shaping them, as you're sculpting them, like we would chant, you know, mantra for them, or, you know, embodying, awakening it. And I said, so my children were younger then, and I was like, can I just buy carved ones? I'm like, can I just buy carved ones? I'm not gonna go buy clay or go get some mud from my garden. I'm like, I'm not really living in a part of the world where the mud in my yard is sort of not all mud's the same. Right, it isn't, and so he said yes, as long as it's like natural materials, wood or carved. So I have like quartz crystal representations of each of those, the vehicles, the animals, and then they sit in the directions facing outwardly off of the yantra, and then if I'm working with one specifically, what comes first is usually the vehicle. Like the animal appears first, and when I say appear, I'm doing this practice with my eyes closed and my consciousness is altered, and so it's almost coming like a feeling and then a mental projection, a mental image. And because when you've been doing it for a long time, using a great part of this is utilizing one's imagination, right? To really transport you, visualize the animal or the beings, or the deities, whoever they are. They're seeing however many arms they've got, whether they're holding a mala or a mace or a book or a musical instrument or a dagger or whatever it is, seeing those, all these artifacts being held, the boons. And so then it really becomes this real experience where you're welcoming them in, you're seeing them, you're holding them, and here they are, and you can have this energetic interaction. So that's, I'm sure you're familiar, that, but there's a lot of people who don't. Like, what do you mean you see them?
Yeah. Yeah, it just keeps for me coming back to this sense of embodiment. Obviously coming from the Tibetan Buddhist background, I'm really struck by the similarities and convergences and also the divergences between these traditions, because there's so much shared imagery, so much shared ritual, accoutrements and procedures and deities and so on, but to see how they're related to in these distinct ways, often with a lot of overlap. But you can see this, I think, a certain degree of disembodiment in the sort of more, shall we say, religious kinds of orientations to it. And I'm using that term very loosely, but there is a distinct difference, a notable difference between a sort of, monastically oriented, liturgical, spiritual tradition where your practice is to open up the text and recite it from front to back and do everything the same every single day that you do it, versus this far more embodied, more immediate kind of approach. The animals being an excellent example of that. Like I said, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the animals are mentioned and they're in the tankas, and you will imagine them as part of the deity yoga if the deity you practice with is associated with one. But to really acknowledge the animals on their own terms and recognize their participation and their inclusion in this sort of sphere, again, in earnest, is something that I think has maybe over time become less important or less prominent, but is still very present in these shamanic traditions, which is of course a continuity across many, many different kinds of quote unquote shamanic traditions across the world, because there is that imminent layer of direct relationship and direct engagement with the so-called natural world. And I love that that's directly integrated into the spiritual path, as opposed to being something that's sort of placed to the side.
Oh, it's amazing. So that would be what I just described is an example of how I'm perhaps working in my home, in my sacred space, with a particular deity. Also, the animals have names too. I keep using the swan as an example because most people are probably familiar with Saraswati, and she has a swan, and the swan is called Hamsa. So, but they all of the animals also have names, and so you can call upon them because that name also represents a bija mantra. Hamsa, as an example again with this one. Hamsa, or so hum, right? Yeah. So there's an activation that's occurring as you welcome in this animal, right? But a big difference that you might find, will be interested in hearing for the Khaas Nepali tradition, is actually when we're doing it actively outside of working with an individual. And so when I was in Nepal, I actually went with my teacher, and we went up into the mountains, like several hours above from Kathmandu. So the lower Himalayas, we were quite high, 11,000 feet maybe. So we were pretty decently up the mountain, but nowhere near the base camp of Everest or anything like that. And as we were journeying, we were traveling with a group of shamans, mountain shamans, probably 20 or so, that Bhola had brought together. And we were practicing rituals. None of these people speak English, so he was translating. They're very traditional. They come from these villages where this is really this person is the shaman of the village. And people do go as they would have traditionally. This is who they seek wisdom from, healing from. Neighboring people who don't have a shaman might come and also see this person. So he had arranged for several different shamans to come. And we had an experience. We spent 3 days at this one location where we were doing really serious activations, serious in the sense that one of the ceremonies, for example, was to release curses known and unknown from you, the individual, from me. Right? So all of us that were there with him, it was, okay, we're doing this, and he explained, this is a ritual for you all to release curses known and unknown. So an unknown curse could be, and I think we talked about this when you could chop down trees in the forest and the nature spirits are cursing you. Or you've gone and you've done something terrible to, somewhere else in nature, and then you've been cursed, unbeknownst to you. And so, perhaps illness befalls you or something else happens and you've had bad luck. You just don't know what that's connected to. A known curse might be somebody who's just gossiping about you. Right? Who's saying not great things or whatever, they're whatever. Like that's more of a known curse. Because the power of the word, right? There's somebody still saying bad things about you. There's power in that, and you feel bad as a result of that. If you find out someone's saying bad things about you, you feel bad. So as he explained it, and then it was quite an involved ceremony. Honestly, it went on all day. So they prepared very specific plants. So everything is from nature. So they had their incense, the rope incense made locally. The ghee is prepared there, the clarified butter. So then they had to get all kinds of specific plants, leaves and things. And they built up this whole very elaborate. And by the way, this is all being done inside in a room. You'd never do this in America, right? They're all codes about fire safety and all this stuff. We're literally setting a fire inside in this room, in this very large room, but honestly, it got burnt down. It's like, and so, they're creating this whole thing, and of course, it's not you're with all these holy men. You're not going to die and I'm going to be burned down in a fire with them. They're totally being held in sacred space by all of the spirits. So anyway, they do this whole elaborate thing. They're fully transcending. They've all got their drums, which are amazing, huge drums. They're on a furba, and the furba in that tradition is called a kila. So all these the huge drums are on a kila. They're not on a strap. Yeah. They're held literally so that you can stake the furba in the ground if you're practicing outside. So in this case, we're inside, so they're holding it, and they're still holding it with the traditional, hand, the mudra symbol, and they're massive handles. So they're holding this huge with the mudra, and then beating the drum, and you can see them. You can literally see when spirit comes in because it takes over you. It embodies you. There's a shaking that happens. You completely see them transcend, and then almost sometimes their whole the tonation in their voice changes, and the mantras and everything. They're really getting into it. So they're moving around doing all this stuff. At one point, we're directed to get up and walk out. Someone else is making some hot coals outside that we have to step on. They've been preparing that. So we did this whole thing, and we're being splattered with boiling hot water from some plants. And then Bhola says, so if anyone has been seriously cursed, they're going to whack you with a ladle. And I'm like, hang on a sec. What do you, a ladle? What do you, oh, yes, don't worry about it. The ladle is going to be, the ladle, by the way, was sitting in the hot coals. So it had turned orange. And I'm like, the ladle that's in the hot coals, one of us is going to be beaten with it to beat the spirit out of you if this other stuff didn't work. I'm like, oh my God, there are I don't know, 15 of us. It was so fun. Everyone's like, oh my God. So Anyway, he's like, oh no, don't worry, it's not hot. And I'm like, it's it's like glowing embers color, right? Like, oh, it's not hot. Okay, it's like you're gonna get branded with like the mark of a ladle. And so we all did this ceremony. We run through, everyone's fine. Like, it's amazing how when you're in that transcendence that you don't feel the heat, right? You don't feel the heat at all. So you're on the coals, you don't feel the boiling water. It come through. We all come, we're running around in circles, directed circles. Come back. Take seats, you can actually feel the energy shifting, and I could feel that, like that, the release. And I stayed in an intention before doing it all for myself, and I could really feel this incredible release. I sat down, and then so we were all hoping we would be able to see someone get whacked by the ladle, not gonna lie, but but fortunately nobody was. But the shaman actually did, one of the main shamans actually did demonstrate it. He did take it, and he said, luckily, like through Ebola, we don't need to use this, but let me show you in case you were scared. And he takes it and he presses, and it was glowing orange, and he pressed it on his hand, and it was as if he was touching, just like took it from the kitchen, the ladle, and from the drawer, and there was no burn mark, no scalding mark, no steam came off his hand. There was nothing, no branding from the heat of the metal. It was incredible. And so he was calling it a spatula, but really it was a metal spatula. It wasn't like a silicon spatula, on the end of some wood. It was like a serious metal spatula. And so it was fascinating because he said, in this state, we've invited in the spirit to embody the tool, and so it will not cause you harm. It's here, it's embodied in this tool to remove whatever needs to be removed. And that is where the harm will be done, to the spirit that needs to be dissolved by the heat of this tool. So it was really interesting to be a part of that and to witness that. And every day we did something else. And on the third day we did a one to actually feel, tune into the Nāgas of the land and really, really merge with the Nāgas. And that was a seriously life-changing experience for me. That was one of to actually feel that connection. And they had, again, another elaborate sort of plant things. They had to procure the right bananas and the right banana leaves. And they had to be from a particular part of Nepal. And so they were brought in, and the leaves were used, and they had a kalasa, like a copper pot, and the water was freezing cold inside the copper pot. The temperature in the room was so hot, warm. We were all in t-shirts. They'd been smoking it up the whole day. Fires are going, it's not. And it was a sunny, nice day outside. So it wasn't freezing at all, right? But yet the water in the kalasa, it was so cold you could see the condensation forming on the outside of the copper pot. And part of this ritual was we had to stick our hand one by one into the copper pot. And there was the main shaman doing it, who's trained in this, and then his assistant, who was standing by to make sure in case. And I'm going to use words that are more easily understood, like possession. Like, sure. So you essentially, in case somebody was taken over and possession occurred. Now that's not really what's happening, but more of embodying is what's happening. But it looks like you're being possessed, like to somebody who the spirit is completely taking them over. It looks like they're being possessed, and so the secondary shaman is there, the assistant, to really help tame the spirit in the body, and then by tying the blessed plants on your upper arm so that it doesn't fully move into the body and take over the person. And then also the lead shaman who's working with the spirit and calling the Naga in also wasn't affected, so that he could immediately help release the lead shaman should anything like this happen. So it's all explained to us. And then, one by one, so we went and did it. And I think I was like the third or fourth person, and it was amazing. I put my hand in. I was surprised with how cold the water was. Very quickly, I could feel it moving up, this incredibly cold sensation moving up my arm. and then I could feel my whole my whole body. I could feel this it like coming, this emergence, this embodying of the spirit with me, the Naga, and it's indescribable unless you've had that, been a part of these practices. It's really indescribable. Some people felt nothing. Some people had no reaction at all, and felt it, and then they just absolutely nothing happened. And Bhola said, "Don't worry if nothing happened. It just means you need to practice more." He's like, "Your practice isn't. You're not at a play. Like you're not ready, essentially." And it was really And that was probably 10, 15 minutes. And then after that, I sat, when he actually did tie the, whatever it was, not a leaf, but something like a long bamboo piece around my arm. And then when I sat back down, I just had this immediate ability I could just tune into not the shamans, all the other Westerners. I could literally tune into all the other Westerners in the room, like as if I was receiving this crazy download about them. It was like, and it was a lot. It was quite overwhelming. But I knew that was something that was really going to enhance and help me with working with individuals, because it had totally opened me up in this other way. Psychically, we could say, just sort of opened me up in this way to channel and to be able to commune and ask for the support from the Nagas in this really powerful way. And it was amazing. And then after that, the next day we went actually further up into the mountain, and this was a 7-hour hike. And as we were doing a hike, we were walking up to like our next destination 7 hours away on the top of this mountain, and 20 shamans came with us, and they chanted and beat their drums the entire time. Wow. The whole time. And then we stopped at sacred sites along the way, and they're in very traditional, they're in their full Khaas Nepali. Now the ritual outfit is very different to a Tibetan, Buddhist Tibetan outfit. Completely different. I mean, they've got a sort of a headband. Yeah. More like a Native American headpiece with feathers, like you tie it around. It's got huge, but peacock feathers tied, in the whole thing, and they tie it around. And then they wear sort of like a long white dress, many layers and layers of white cloth that sort of looks like a whirling dervish, and these with then red layers under fabric underneath, and bandolier bells that cross over the body, and loads of huge rude raksha malas, several of them, wearing around, and some also quartz crystal, but quite a few layers of things, and then they're wearing bells on their ankles and wrists, and then they have the drum, so they're really. They're really awakening the spirits with all of the things that they've got going on in the bells and everything. And so then we would go to these sacred sites amongst in the forest, in this mountain on the way up. And that was incredible. I mean, you could just really feel the energy in these sacred places. It was wild. Really, really amazing. And I don't think you can't just find them. They're not like, oh, I'm going to head up the mountain and go look at this cave temple. They're not visible. Like, you really have to know where's the path that leads you to this place that's kind of hidden. And then when we were there were thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of tridents, because it was a Shiva temple in the side of the mountain, and it's just filled with like tridents of all different heights and sizes, and that people have brought there and done practices with. And it was really amazing. It was really, really amazing to experience that and see how they work and how they practice and what it looks like to be doing it like amongst nature and really calling in all of the support of nature spirits and activating. And then you can really feel that shift in everything. It was a really amazing experience.
It sounds. It's always wild to think that these sorts of practices, they're so distinct, by region and by different cultural groups, etc. But also they have historically been pervasive across the entire world. There's a reason why we find so many interesting and sort of quite crazy when you see them, similarities between traditions that you might find in the Himalayas versus Siberia versus the Americas versus Africa, Oceania, etc. There has been this continuity because many of these ways of living and these ways of engaging in the world go back at least tens and tens of thousands of years, if not hundreds of thousands of years. But it's quite wild to think of, the fact that there would have been a time when everywhere, including places like, here in Europe, where these kinds of modes of behavior wouldn't have seemed so foreign. There would have been a lot of similarities between these kinds of modes of engagement and the forms that you would have found in places like even Britain. And yet today it's so vastly different. We've really, sort of cut ourselves off from these ways of existing in the world and in relationship with place and with the beings seen and unseen that inhabit those places. I'm curious because this is something that is a big area of research for me, is provocation disorders in the Tibetan medical tradition, or dunne they're called in Tibetan, or bhuta disorders as they're known in India, and I'm expecting similar terminology is used in the Himalayas as well. And there's always this interesting, dynamic between the afflictions that humans experience, which can take the form of, what we might call possession. It's called Jungpo Dun in the Tibetan tradition, where it really is a particular spirit class that's understood to be really sort of overpowering and in some cases actually inhabiting a human being's body and sort of taking over. But then also other forms of provocation, which aren't necessarily possession, but they're forms of illness that arise due to an imbalanced relationship or some kind of affliction, or conflict between humans and non-human beings. And it's very much linked to environmental circumstances. And this is something that in my research, at least, it seems to really be a strongly Himalayan and Tibetan contribution to this field of knowledge, that there's a very precise focus on the root causes of these kinds of imbalances and how those are linked to environmental desecration. Like you said, cutting down trees, especially trees that should not be cut down, that are particular abodes of particular powerful spirits, or poisoning water supplies, or setting fires where you shouldn't set fires, or killing animals in sensitive places where they shouldn't be harmed. There's all kinds of traditional methods of really understanding the complex dynamics that exist in our relationship with the so-called natural world, and the things that can go wrong when we transgress against the natural boundaries that are there. And it goes both ways in this sense. I'm curious, in the Khaas Nepali tradition, are there any processes or practices that are sort of focused on restoration? Are there restorative practices? You find these in some traditions, including in Tibetan traditions, of maybe planting trees instead of cutting them down, offering trees, offering new vegetation, or placing treasure vases into a pond or into a river, in a sacred place, into a cave, in order to create a sense of restoration, a sense of returning to these spirits and trying to sort of apologize to them for the harms that are caused to them.
Yeah. Well, so a tangible story for listeners is, so when I was there on one of the days where we were based, so those three days, a villager came in because all the shamans were there and had shared that their community had been experiencing a lot of tragedy and bad luck. Tragedy in that people had become sick and then would die kind of unexpectedly, and that things just seemed to not be going well for that village. So the shamans, while we were still doing our stuff, they set up a separate ritual. They did a practice, and they tuned in to the Nāgas spirits of where we were, and they asked what was going on. Right, what's happening here, and this was all communicated to us by Bhola, who shared what was happening here, and this is an interesting observation for you all to see what's happening here now, and how this can work to your to kind of answer your question. I'll answer the full finish now, but anyway, so the shamans tuned into the Nāgas, and they told the villagers that when was it? 2015 or 2011? Nepal had that huge earthquake,
Oh yeah, I think
right? And so they said the rebuilding from that earthquake, that they were not doing it correctly. They had not been, because so much earth and land, and that village, as many of these villages are, they're in the mountains, they're on the side of the mountain. Like if there's a natural disaster, they will tumble down, right? And so they had been rebuilding their whole village, and it was almost complete now. But during this time, they had cut down trees, move things, cut into the mountainscape where there were roots, old roots, right? And so the Nāgas communicated through the shamans that they were very unhappy about this, because things were, and so when there were tragedies, people weren't just getting sick, they were maybe falling off of a ladder while they were on one of these, on the side of the mountain building the house. It somehow would just loosen and they would fall. Also, things don't, it's not like construction in the West, right, as well. It's a lot, it's kind of easy as well for a bamboo ladder to lose its grip and fall. However, they're pretty good about really stabilizing things in the mud, because this is how they've been building things for a very, very long time. And even though there's no inspectors coming around, it's still pretty, like, they know what they're doing, they're not just putting stuff together. So anyway, and then the Nāgas gave a prescription and said, here is what you can do to appease us, to help heal the land and make these offerings. And so about an hour or so later, my gosh, all these villagers appeared, because they all wanted to know, what can we do? What can we do? Like, this was no joke. I mean, they literally, all these like innocent people just showed up who were like, wanted to hear what the shamans had to say, and they were really ready and willing to participate and do whatever they had to do, whatever it was going to take. Do we need to reposition this? Do we need to move that house that we built there? Do we need to plant things? Obviously, a lot of milk and things like this were being prescribed as offerings, mantras to be chanted, and so on. So that's an example of, like, I witnessed that. I saw them really communicating this, and the spirits, and it was the Nāga spirits of that particular area, who were communicating what needed to be done to appease them, to help. And they were just telling them straight up, this is what you need to do. What's interesting is, Bhola often talks about, there's a very specific ritual, you might be familiar with this as well, where you offer milk. You offer milk to the Nāgas into a waterway, a stream, and so you do it during Nag Panchami, once a year when we celebrate the Nāgas. You offer milk into a waterway of some sort and pour it. So you wouldn't do it into a sink or a toilet in your own home, because the toilet is disrespectful, but you would go out into a, somewhere where you could have access to a pond or even the ocean, and you might look crazy pouring a bit of milk in, but milk is a non-harming natural product that dissolves and dissipates into the water. So it's not actually poisoning anything alive,
except for the cows. Except for the cow. Just enough to put with it.
Well, you don't have to go and milk a cow. You could just obtain cream or milk.
No, it would be a lot less violent if you get it from a village cow. That's, I think that's an important distinction, that there's a bit of a, if I ever do Naga Puja, I always use a plant-based milk, because I'm vegan, so I don't use animal products. But, that's one of those things where there hasn't necessarily been that acknowledgement of the vast, vast world of difference between the ways that cows are treated in traditional societies, that
is true,
honor them as beings and as sacred beings, versus in the West. And
well, Nandi is a vehicle too. Nandi is the cow whose sheep is, he's a sacred. That's why they're sacred in throughout that region, in India, Nepal, Tibet. You see them walking around. But I mean, so that's one way that I guess we, as ignorant Westerners, if we were interested in this and wanted to do that, there you can take a small jug or a cup and just, don't bring a whole milk bottle out and pour it into it's literally a little bit, and just sort of holding with reverence, thanking the land, thanking the beings there, apologizing, and Bhola uses a very specific phrase. What does he say? He doesn't say it's not an apology. It's I ask for excuse. I ask for your excuse.
Yeah.
I ask for your excuse. I know I am ignorant. I don't know I'm sorry. I don't know how I have harmed you, or my ancestors may have harmed you. Please forgive me. I ask for an excuse, and I offer you this milk, right, to as an offering for the land, right, for the beings there, which is really beautiful. And he always says, I know not all of you live in a house or have land. If you are in a city and you have an apartment, he said, try to take it, make these offerings, because we often will do them over Zoom. And I mean, he's taught me really elaborate yajnas over Zoom. I mean, it's a fire ceremony and honestly, we've had to procure like full on stuff, the sangria, like all the things, the herbs and spices, like all the offerings, like all the, and then a black cloth, cotton cloth that you've got to wrap chilies in and limes or lemons and sleep with them under the pillow for 3 nights, and not have, if you've got a partner who you share your bed with, they should not sleep with you for those nights while you're doing this, sort of detoxification and whatever, you're doing. And then we take the thing and you burn that, and it's like really can get really, I mean, and that's not even an overly elaborate one.
Right. I love the apology. I think is really fascinating, because there's a vast chasm of difference between apology rituals and confession rituals, and this is something that I really love about these traditions. There's some, very few, but there are some apology prayers in Tibetan Buddhism for nature spirits. And sometimes they're translated as confessions, and I absolutely detest that, because there's such a difference between confessing to an authority that you did something wrong and avoiding negative consequences by the grace of some kind of divinity, versus apologizing to the beings that you've wronged directly and asking for them to excuse your behavior and to repair the relationship that you have with them directly. And this is something that you find in Naga pujas, specifically in these traditions, and in other related nature spirit kinds of practices, and land spirit kinds of restoration practices and so on. That's very unique, because it's really taking responsibility for the relationship. It's not about trying to petition to some kind of arbiter, judge, up in the heavens to make sure that you don't experience anything negative down the road. It's really getting to the root. It's going to the source of the problem and apologizing and restoring the relationships that we have with these beings, which is so profoundly powerful. And also it brings in that relational element. You're talking about this experience in the village, and I want listeners to just imagine the difference between that model, which has so many layers of relationship, emotion, and a real sense of kinship and real direct engagement, versus models that are strictly concerned with sustainability. These are completely different things. One of them contains this emotional, really embodied dimension of relationship, and one is strictly based in facts and figures and the sustainability of methods of exploitation. And we completely abandon that feedback loop, which is so powerful and so present in traditions where there still are figures like shamans that negotiate the relationships between humans and our non-human kin in the environment in which we live. And that's an element that I think is absolutely indispensable. It's an indispensable form of knowledge that comes from many different traditions around the world, and yet we treat them in so many cases as sort of cultural traditions, like a circle dance or something, which is strictly we need to respect and we can sort of watch and appreciate as a cultural tradition, as a kind of art, as opposed to a form of knowledge and a mode of engagement that still has a lot of wisdom to impart upon us that we really need to take seriously.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, this wasn't like, I wasn't on a tourist, holiday. Like I wasn't being... I didn't meet up in Kathmandu and organize some kind of, I want to go into the mountains and see some shamans. This was like months and months of like him preparing, and then, okay, we're going to go do this and here, and this itinerary, which was full on. Like it was, we're staying, like we're sleeping in the mountains. We're not going to resorts, we're not, you may not shower for 5 or 7 days. Like, we're really staying in rural mountain communities, and which you also have to prepare yourself for.
Yep.
Right. And so I was like, okay, amazing. Cause I knew it wasn't a vacation. This was a spiritual pilgrimage of serious dedication and expansion. And so I can imagine, had that been some sort of, you see people always go to everywhere around the world, right? You can sort of go to Stonehenge, and you live in the UK, and there's like flocks of people, and it's a tourist destination, and it's like people almost losing, not recognizing the sacredness of where they're at, right? What's happening here. And so if that had been some sort of tourist experience, to see mountain shamans, and the villagers had come in, it's like, you don't get it. It's like, oh, how cute.
Yeah.
Oh, they've all come in and look at this. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But because we were really doing these reciprocity practices and learning how to embody them and really truly commune with the nature spirits and command their respect and work with them in ways that they can actually not just help you, the individual, but support that individual to help others. To actually, it's all about helping out, like opening up to all that is. Right? It really is. We're not, it's not just about us, the one person. So that was a really incredible experience to witness, because we weren't expecting it. It wasn't planned. It was like literally this one guy came in and shared what he shared with the shaman. Then Bolo said, because it was a bit of an interruption, it was like, oh, what's this guy? Who's this guy? What's he doing? And then Bolo said, and he seemed quite worried. He was like, oh, you could just tell, even though we didn't speak the language. And then Bolo explained to us, and we were like, oh, wow. And he said, yeah, it's pretty serious. This is what's been going on here. And, they just want to understand. And then when they did the ritual, and then like literally, like I said, an hour later, these 20 other villagers showed up. It was like, wow. And they really were very seriously taking it all in. Like, what can we do? How can we appease the land? And that's, often I think about shamanism with it being a tourist attraction, particularly in South America, where everybody wants to, not everybody, a lot of people want to go and take ayahuasca and just be in the jungle and whatever, not realizing that this is a seriously sacred practice.
Yeah.
This is a practice of healing, and it's not. One other thing I witnessed when I was there, a friend of mine, a colleague of mine that was with me, he started to develop really the early signs of shingles on his forehead. And we were up there, and at first I thought it was, it was like a skin reaction because we actually hadn't washed for a few days at that point, and I thought maybe he'd scratched his skin from a bite, and it just was getting really bad, and it was becoming quite a visible rash on his forehead and in his hairline. Impetigo, kind of like an impetigo type of rash. It looked like that. And I got him some calamine lotion from a villager, because often in those, they all have calamine lotion. I'm like, oh, everyone's got calamine lotion up here. They've all got it, because they do encounter skin rashes and stuff because of hygiene issues. Yeah. So I said, oh, someone here is going to have calamine lotion. Trust me, they're going to have it. It's all like, let's get you some. And that sort of just tapered it. But then we were with another group of shamans as we kind of crossed over, like that group receded back to where they were from. Then we went over the mountain to another side, and then we were with these other shamans. And in this village, this shaman told my friend that it was, an unhappy spirit. And I said to my friend, you have to really ask your spirit guides and your higher self right now. And he's a little bit young, quite a bit younger than me. And I said, so I was sort of like a much older sister or whatever. And I said, you really have to ask yourself, what is the right thing for you to do? If you feel like you need to leave and go back to Kathmandu and go to an actual clinic, you should do that. Because I feel like while there's a lot the shamans can tune into, and they understand about the land and the nature spirits that comes from many centuries of practice with the lands, what they don't understand necessarily are modern day illnesses and how bacteria and viruses and modern day things can occur and trigger things in the body. He also doesn't know you and what you might have going on that has potentially triggered, because by then it was getting really bad, like quite bad. Like 2 days later, it was much worse. And he left, he went back to Kathmandu. It was like 8-hour, a vehicle had to be organized for him to come get him, to take him back to Kathmandu. And when we had returned several days later, he said to me, "It's shingles. I've got shingles." And the doctor was like, "Thank God you came down the mountain and came to the clinic," because they could immediately give him what he needed, and it had was better. But it was moving into his eye, so his eye was becoming bloodshot. And which they said, if you had stayed up there, who knows, it could have gone into your brain and other parts. So I just want to point that out with, these ancient practices and communing with spirits is without a doubt incredible and amazing and life-changing. But there is, for sure, we utilize these practices for very specific things. And I think when you're working with spirit, without a doubt, nothing else is going to compare to that. Modern medicine, modern whatever advances aren't going to be able to step into that world, to cross those boundaries and activate. But if you have a modern medical issue, seek both, and in this instance, he really needed to, and it was important that he trusted that. And I, so what I said, and he went and turned out like he made the right choice, where that mountain shaman, he got a little bit offended. He was like, "Oh, you're not going to, I've cleared the spirit from you, you're fine now." And I just thought to myself, no, you haven't. Like, this is not the same as giving the advice. And he wasn't the same guy who was with us in the other village. But I thought, this is not the same. Yeah. So the point of this story is, people go off to the Amazon thinking they can be cured of whatever, but it's like, be aware, like, these are ancient practices that need to be respected in a way that can, if you want to be healed, you consider what are you healing?
Yeah.
Consider how this modality of healing can work to really free you, bring up your shadow, what needs to be faced, really help you tune into perhaps ancestral karma or trauma or whatever things that, can be really dealt with in this sort of spiritual sense. But if it's something that's really, I don't think you can be cured of, other things. Maybe they go in tandem because energetically your body needs to be held and up-leveled. But there's some things that modern medicine definitely, you need to seek the assistance,
It's a fascinating little intersection as someone that's is technically a Tibetan medicine practitioner, but then also a strong believer in the value of modern medicine. There's another dimension to that I think is really fascinating, is a lot of disorders that aren't of the possession variety in Tibetan medicine, but are still considered to be dunne, provocation disorders, are in fact viral illnesses, microbial disorders, things that are in fact on paper diseases that are caused by invisible non-human beings.
Yeah, for sure. And they absolutely, I 100%, yeah. But it's like, I think it's, well, you continue, because I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, well, I think you'll agree with this, and what I think is incredibly valuable, and also to that point, in a lot of cases, the kinds of medicines that an amchi, a Tibetan doctor, would prescribe to someone that has a spirit-related disorder, which is very clearly viral or bacterial in nature. The traditional medicines to give in those cases are usually strong herbal antibacterial or antimicrobial medicines, or herbs that have been shown to have some kind of antiviral properties, even though these medicines are in no way comparable to what we have.
Well, my friend wasn't being given anything, and that was what alarmed me. He wasn't being nothing was being prepared for him. Had this guy then gone and taken the action to say, actually, I'm going to need to call on these other people, and we need to make you a brew, then I would have gone, okay, they're making you a brew. I trust there's something else. But he kind of was just like chanted over him for 10 minutes and then was like, you're fine. Right. And I just thought to myself, no, you actually need to but I don't want to scare you. You've got to tune into that yourself. You have to feel that. And he did. And then I was like, I think you made the right decision. You should go.
Absolutely. What I think is really valuable from these traditions in negotiating in the modern world, today, including in a world of COVID and SARS viruses and bird flus and all of these things, what I do think is incredibly valuable from these traditional systems of medicine and shamanic healing and so on, is an attempt to identify the root causes of these outbreaks in the first place. And I think when it comes to epidemic infections particularly, this is a really important point, because a lot of people don't realize that the vast majority of the the infectious diseases that we deal with as humans today have only been with us for about the past 10 to 12,000 years. They arose around the dawn of animal agriculture, as opposed to hunter-gatherer societies. That was really the inception point for a lot of these disorders. And when we look at major outbreaks of these, very serious diseases, things like SARS viruses, COVID-19, bird flus, etc., they are zoonotic infections that are really arising out of our mistreatment and unhealthy relationships with animals and animal environments. SARS viruses and Ebola viruses live in bat colonies, which are usually far removed from human settlements, but they've become less removed due to our increasing encroachment upon their territories. And when we look at that factor, which is something that can only really be, I think, truly negotiated through a sense of relationship and real, more than human involvement, unless we deal with those root causes, then all we're doing is putting out spot fires. And we need to do that. We need to put out the spot fires. Otherwise, we have massive, massive numbers of casualties and major, catastrophe. But we have to really deal with the fundamental root cause. And this is something that I think we really need from these traditional ways of looking at these sorts of illnesses. We need modern biomedicine to treat them when they arise, but we need traditional ontologies and ways of living in order to prevent them in the first place. We need to recognize that these kinds of diseases do in fact arise from our mistreatment of quote unquote nature. And it's personified through these spirit paradigms. But that is, whether people believe in spirits on a literal level or not, that is a profoundly useful paradigm for navigating and negotiating these kinds of relationships in real time. It causes us to really think about things far more proactively. We're not just being stuck on dealing with things once they've gotten to a breaking point or when something's become unsustainable. We're looking at the ethics and the relationality of our behavior all the time.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously that example I gave was shingles. It wasn't, a flu, but and that wasn't connected to an animal. And as it turned out, he had been extremely stressed before leaving the US to come. So something had triggered that, and that's often how the shingles virus is triggered in our bodies. It's stress related. So something he had been experiencing a lot of stress, and then because of how we were, our conditions and so on, and the arduous, like the hiking and long days and all these other practices that we were doing, these purging practices, the purging practices had interestingly triggered that and was bringing it to the surface. So just to be clear here, it wasn't like, disrespecting or disregarding, but I knew in that moment, to your point, that this is a modern problem, and he may not have the skill to necessarily navigate what is happening here. He probably hasn't heard the word, I don't know what it translates to in Nepali.
No, shingles have been acknowledged in Himalayan societies.
But so it was like, you should do what you need, what feels the best for your own good right now. And it turned out that it absolutely was, because it was so up here by the head, by the eyeball and the brain. And, I think if it had been on his thigh, he probably could have sucked it up and been like, I can deal with this for another few more days. But it was, in that part of the head where it was just too risky.
Oh, absolutely. And just to clarify my point, I'm also not saying that everyone that gets an infectious disease has personally pissed off some kind of spirit or disrespected an animal or something like that. It's more about the origins of these kinds of viral infections and other forms of infections to begin with.
Yeah.
This is an important point. They're known as rhimne in Tibetan, which is it's a contagious disease. It goes step by step or person to person. And it's not so much that every single person that gets ill has been somehow involved in some kind of spiritual transgression. It's more that humanity and human societies as a whole provoke these kinds of diseases due to a foundational sort of transgression or misstep, which then becomes something that we have to deal with on a very medical level.
So then, do you consider that this sort of spiritual flu? How in our practice, right? There's this sort of notion of the spiritual flu, like you're activating something, you're working with entities or energies and the deities, and then there seems to be this a domino effect where suddenly everyone, if you're all together in this group working with, suddenly everyone's down with the flu, and it's some kind of,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And then they're all got the
No,
flu, and it's not like, it's not like it's the regular flu. It's like somehow something's been activated. What do you think about that, like the spiritual flu?
It's an interesting phenomenon. I definitely think just anytime you get a lot of people in close proximity from all around that are very close together and interacting with one another, you're bound to get some diseases. And I do also think that there's a sense of, a lot of times spiritual retreat environments, people are expected to wake up very early. They're usually eating foods they're not used to necessarily. They're engaging in a very heightened sort of emotional and psychological and physical way that may be something out of the ordinary for them. And you get people from all over that are carrying their own little microbiomes with them. So you can end up having these sorts of issues. That would be my sort of rational explanation for it. But yeah, certainly there could potentially be other dynamics that are a part of that. We used to always say, when I used to live at Taramandala in Colorado, or Buddhist retreat center, we would do chud a lot. And every time we'd have the chud retreat roll around in the summer, that was always the week that everyone would get sick. So everyone would say, "Oh, it's the chud retreat because we're calling in all of these beings, and it makes us more susceptible." I'm not sure where I stand on that, myself. But it's an
Well, I just thought of
thing.
it because you said, there's a practice where you would all do, and everybody, or not you, but, in Tibet, that people would go and they would get sick. They would all get sick. So
Yeah.
I wondered if that was spiritual flu.
Yeah.
Something's being activated within them.
Yeah. Who knows? We should probably start wrapping it up. This has been a really fascinating conversation. There's a couple of things I want to ask you. One, and this is also something that I wanted to mention to your point about ayahuasca. Something that I think, a lot of people don't realize is that in a traditional context, if someone were to go and do a shamanic ceremony in the Amazon with an ayahuasquero, they're not going and taking the ayahuasca themselves. The ayahuasquero is taking the ayahuasca, and the patient will receive the healing from the experienced ayahuasquero that's taking the ayahuasca. And this is something that's very similar in a lot of, I think, shamanic sorts of communities, neo-shamanic potentially, or folks that want to go and experience shamanism. There's an expectation that if we're interested in shamanism, then we are supposed to go out and become a shaman and do all the things that the shamans do. But that's never been the traditional expectation. Shamans are called into shamanism, into being a shaman through many different avenues, often through, severe illnesses and coming very close to death, or coming from a family lineage where it's something that you've received in that way. It's very, I think for a lot of people that come from traditionally shamanic societies, most people are really trying not to become a shaman. That's something that you would actively try to avoid because it's such a difficult existence and involves a lot of physical and psychological and also social hardship. So, to your point, it's something that, we want to sort of experience things, and I think in some cases appropriate these traditions in a way that seems most exciting, when in reality it's more about honoring the knowledge that these beings, these people have, and engaging in that world. I've always said, I think a lot of people who are drawn to shamanism, they want to be animists, or they are animists, and they're called to animistic ontologies. And there are ways to engage with that don't involve dropping everything and trying to become a shaman. And I'm curious, obviously you've had a call from a very young age to be in direct relationship with these spirits, with the spirit guides, with the Nāgas, etc. That puts you in a slightly different category than I think the average person. But for the average person that feels a deep draw to animism, feels a deep draw to these kinds of traditions, to spirits and so on, how can they engage in a way that doesn't sort of appropriate the shaman role, but that still allows them to be in more dynamic relationship with the beings around them and with the living earth? What recommendations would you make to someone who wants to incorporate some of these ancient life ways, which are really, it's a birthright for all of us. Every single one of us have animistic ancestors not so long ago. How can we revive that in an honest and respectful way?
Thank you. I love that question. I'm going to answer that question through just an example with myself and then what I tell my clients. So, firstly, I don't consider myself a shaman, and I definitely don't put on all the Nepalese clothing because that doesn't feel authentic to me. And I was drawn to these practices for exactly the animistic reasons. I loved the fact that there's this connection, all pervasive connection to nature and all that is, and learning to understand how to tune into them has been huge, very expansive for me. When I work with people, reason I describe myself as a transformation coach and not a healer is because I say I'm not healing you. I'm guiding you to transform yourself. And through practices you will be given to attune to this healing, the inner healing modality, the inner healing ability that you have innately, right? And so, which a lot of us forget. We've had the ability to heal ourselves. And when I say heal, I use that in the term of becoming whole again, becoming a whole person, a whole individual. So perhaps you've had these traumatic experiences, whether they're emotional or physical or sexual, that have shattered aspects of the self and made us now create throughout our life different versions of ourselves, coping mechanisms to get by, right? And so that affects the way we move forward in the world, how we perhaps maybe treat others, but definitely how we treat ourselves. And so when I work with people, we go deep into, I can see it in the body energetically, how is it settling, how is it resonating, and then that gets shifted and moves. And so when I sort of introduce these sort of shamanic aspects, it's sometimes in this sort of churning of moving the energy up and out of the body so it can release. But then the person's given a practice to do a mantra for 41 days that comes in spontaneously, and it's always exactly what they need. I mean, there's hundreds of mantras, right? And I'm always surprised with how perfect that mantra is for that person to use for 41 days. It's remarkable. And then I say to them, attune to that. We're going to activate your mala. We're going to embody in spirit the mala so it can become activated and really a tool you can work with. And it will actually embody the mantra itself. So when you wear it, the vibration, the frequency against your skin, under your clothing, you're going to feel that as something that is working with you. So to answer your question, what I tell people is once we've done this, spirit talks to us in all different ways. And we've just been taught to think it's crazy or we're imagining it. And so one of the easiest, you're walking your dog, or going for a jog or, whatever you're doing, that's one way that often spontaneous conversation comes. You have an idea. The shower is another way, right? I always say, how many times have you been in the shower and you suddenly remembered, I wrote someone's phone number or name on a tiny piece of paper because I didn't have my phone. I couldn't put the number in, and it's in the pocket of some coat or your jeans or a bag or whatever, right? And suddenly you remember that. And that is spirit. That's your intuition. That's it talking to you, reminding you now is the time. Here's where that phone number is. Call that person today. Right? That's a really simple one because we've all had that experience. We just push it off as you get out of the shower, you forget. Right? You just totally forget. You're like, what? I don't know. But remember that, get out of the shower and go get that phone number and call. There's a reason you're being directed. That's divine guidance. But also really listening, learning to listen is the hardest thing. When we're taught, people always say, I don't know how to meditate. I can't meditate. Can't quiet my mind. And I think there's such a misconception and unnecessary stress around learning to meditate and meditation itself, right? You're not going to quiet your mind. So don't stress about that. Don't let it be a thing. Don't go, I can't, that's what's great about using a mala. It's a distraction. It's helping you count you're feeling it, it's tangible, you're working with this piece, that's helping you focus on the mantra. But if that doesn't work for you, there's so many options. There's guided practices where you can just hear someone else take you through, guide you to another place. And there's so many wonderful guided practices that aren't mantra based, that are really using energy, using the imagination, allowing you to just settle into your body, free your body, breath. There's meditation practices that you utilize pranayama, and so you can really open up. Just breathing is an amazing way to attune ourselves. Just the simple act, the cosmic breath is amazing, right? When you really take it in through the nostrils and out through the mouth, really learning to settle in the body. We're not taught how to settle in our bodies. We're not taught that rest is good. We're not taught that taking a moment for ourselves is important, right? We're taught that, especially in the West, that you've just got to keep going. Go, 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 go. Get up, work, now, check your emails. As opposed to just being, and then, because when we're so active, we've blocked out everything. It's in those silent, quiet moments, which is why the shower is so powerful, which is why when you're walking your dog or working out or swimming, because you're not, swimming is another great one because you're in the water, like the shower, the negative ions, are really amazing. And you typically don't have headphones in the water, in the shower, or in the like swimming, right? So you are in your own quiet bubble, headspace, where you're doing, and that's when these messages come to you, where you feel that intuition. The problem is so many of us go back immediately, you get out of the water, out of the shower, like I said before, and you don't follow through, right? So that's the first step, is listening and learning to listen. And then after that, once people learn to listen, they're like, oh my God. I get so many people say to me, I always thought that was crazy. I thought it was crazy that I kept hearing the same message, call this person, or reach out to so-and-so, or, don't go this way today, go another way. I always find it weird, like the car when you're driving, right? So many times you get this sense, don't go that way today. Well, maybe there's an accident that way. Maybe there's a giant crane that's, working on a building in the city and you shouldn't go that way because you'll be delayed 30 minutes. You'll get stuck. So listen, no matter how small it seems, it's not always about reaching out to a person. It's sometimes about another type of action. Don't cross the road today. Go this way instead. So, or even with your body, you might feel something unusual, pain, what is that? And it keeps coming to you. But communication comes in really amazing ways, and we can hear it as a voice being spoken to us, or we can feel it in our bodies, like really you feel it, right? You feel it in the body. Where do we feel? You feel that in your gut, right? You feel it in the solar plexus. That's not the right decision to make. No, don't sign that contract. No, don't do that. Don't go there today. You feel it in the body. That is, again, your spirit guides, your intuition. That's how they communicate with us. They give us signs. They show us in our body, whether we hear them or whether we feel it. So, or sometimes you need to be shown, like literally in front of you. A crow flies down, it's not a bad sign. Crows aren't bad. Maybe it's the vehicle for a deity, and there is a sign there that this being, something is guiding you to not go that way today. So.
Speaking of guided meditations, I believe you have some online that people can access. And also, can you let people know how they can find out more about your work and where to find you?
Yes, thank you. I do. I have a couple of meditations that are on the Hay House Empower You app, and they are guided meditations. One's 11 minutes and one's 20 minutes, so they're relatively short and easy to do. And you can just lay back and follow along, and you can download the Empower You app from the App Store. And my website, I have TatyannaWright.com, and that is, my name is spelled Tatyanna Wright, WRIGHT, so TatyannaWright.com. And then I have the Conscious Diva website as well, theconsciousdiva.com, which is my podcast. You can listen to Eric there and many other people. Yeah, so it was a pleasure today, Eric. Thank you so much. I hope I answered all your questions.
You did. I mean, we could, we had this same issue when we did the podcast for Conscious Diva. I think we did 2.5 episodes. But I mean, we could talk for hours and hours and hours. So I thank you so much for doing this. Thanks for being here. It really means a lot. It's been a lovely conversation. And we'll have to do it again because there's still so many things to chat about. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. We'll have a wonderful week. Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Tatyanna Wright for joining us for this really incredible episode and talk about a lot of really fascinating things. We'll be back next week with another episode. And to support our podcast, please check out patreon.com/EricJampa. And you can find more information about Unseen Beings, the book, and the podcast at www.unseen-beings.com. Until next time, this has been Eric Jampa Anderson. Take care.